Welcome to episode 2, Truth About Me podcast. I'm Eric. In the last episode, I talked about the house I grew up in, the silence, the structure, the emotional gaps. But today, I want to talk about what that silence created in me. See, I didn't just grow up in that house, I adapted to it. I became someone who paid attention, stayed quiet, and carried a lot more than I should have at that age. This one's for the kids who learn to keep it all inside just to feel safe. When you grow up in a home where emotions aren't talked about, you don't just miss out on connection. You start to believe your feelings don't matter. And coming from a fuck your feelings type of generation, it's true. I learned early on that emotions were only shown during conflict. Again, it was no fault to my parents, but that's just how it was. There was no I love yous, there was no attaboys, there was no this, and the only true emotion that I saw were when was in a negative light. Like if I had messed up, if my sister or brother had messed up, or anything that went on, like that's how I saw emotions, right? Like that's when they came out, and during that conflict, it wasn't a positive experience. So instead of expressing what I felt, I started to kind of look around and see body language and how my parents were interacting, and then even outside of that, how other people were interacting um, when they were talking about certain subjects or matters or whatnot. So it was something that I became very observant. So that's why, like, one of my favorite things is I love people watching. Um, and it's not just a certain type of person. It's really just anybody, because just to wonder what they're going through, what they're seeing, how they're walking, how they're talking, how they're carrying themselves. What are they actually doing? What are they actually thinking? And that's one thing that I absolutely love to do, is I love to people watch, just to see, how close I am. Now, don't go up to these people and say, "Hey, I've been watching you for the past, 2 minutes." No, it's one thing where I'll see something and I'll just, you know, internalize it and kind of create something within myself to be like, I wonder if this person's actually like what I'm thinking. Um, so that you can learn a lot about somebody by um, you know watching their body language and how they're able to um, sorry about that, watching how they're able to um, when they interact, whether it be in a single setting, individual setting, or in a group setting. You have people, you have your alphas, you have your betas, you have those type of people, you have your introverts, you have your extroverts, and then you have everybody kind of in between, and you have your life of the party, and then somebody who stands in a corner and just observes. So I was, growing up, I was a relatively shy kid. I was a tough kid because I was, bullied for being a bigger kid. So it's kind of something that I had to accept and kind of stand up for myself. So I was always known as a tough kid because I didn't take crap from anybody. And that usually showed up in school and whatnot. I will say, like, my friends growing up, they were good people. I never really had an issue with them, so to speak. But every once in a while, somebody would come along and kind of challenge that, and just kind of put it to bed. So, with me being shy, I was always, quiet observer. Not because, that's just how I stayed out of the line of fire. Because again, when it came to emotions, I only knew it during conflict. To me, crying, as a kid, I don't really recall. I don't really recall that too much. I do recall having a little bit of an anger issue as a child, but crying to me, again, it wasn't something that is kind of formed as weakness rather than strength. Um, you know, so I basically learned how to deal with it on my own because, again, communication from my parents was few and far between. We weren't, what I would call an open family. It was it was if you didn't have to speak about it, then you didn't. You just kind of took it and processed it on your own. There wasn't like, hey, listen, situation that just came up. How are you feeling about this? Is there anything you want to talk to us about? What can we do to make that, better for you? It was, well, situation happened. Now you have to deal with it. And, growing up in, that sort of era. And here's the thing is it was something that everybody was doing. Um, excuse me. So it wasn't like it was out of the norm that I saw around my friend group. But again, it was if you were having conversation with your parents, usually you weren't in the room with your friends when they were having that conversation. They'd be like, hey, I have to talk to X or I have to talk to Y. Can you go outside for a little bit and so we can get that resolved? So I mean, there were a few situations when that definitely came about, but I didn't understand it because that's something that I never experienced from for my own home life, which was, we came in and it was the work conversation. How was your day? What'd you do? Yeah, and that was kind of it. It wasn't anything of depth. Um, so that kind of shaped my identity. So I kind of experimented by starting and playing roles without even knowing it. I always felt, I was the good kid, the one who didn't cause problems, and how I handled things. I would say I was an average brother at best, because again, we weren't taught about family and the importance of, you know, protecting it. Like, we were individuals, and that's kind of how, I took it. Growing up, which was, fend for yourself type of thing. Only the strongest survive. And with that being said, was it right? At the time, it was. you know, um, because again, there was, when you're in that sort of, I don't want to say you're pinned against anybody, but it kind of, you have that individual feeling of, um, if I don't do it, then nobody's gonna do it. So um, I will say I don't think it was a conscious choice on my end. Um, I just think it was because of the how we were raised and what it meant was, you had to learn how to be strong at a very young age, be stable, be low maintenance, kind of fly under the radar, if you will, not cause too many waves. And um, knowing that, uh, that's kind of, what I tried to, emulate. Um, and realizing this at a later time, it was, not, now I'm starting to, kind of tap into my childhood and, you know, think about certain situations that I can recall and see how they were handled and what could have been done differently. Um, not, getting too consumed with like, oh my God, if this had happened, my life would be drastically different, and like, and throwing me into some sort of depression, if you will, or into a dark hole, and that's not really what I do. Is I look at everything as a learning lesson, an opportunity to learn. In 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 my time, especially right now, it's really it's really about learning, different things and how I can apply them to be a better person, be a better father, be a better partner, be a better man. And, but in the end, growing up like that, I internalized a lot. And, as we go on through this series, that internalization of, whether it was name calling, bullying, um, just, bad things that happen, like not being able to talk about certain things, or, um, you ultimately turn into a stick of dynamite, and all it takes is one person just to light that fuse, and then boom, it all comes out. And I had learned that at a very, later on, probably like my mid 20s, um, where I was just like, I have to, start talking about things. Actually, I would probably say late 20s, excuse me. That's a long time, when you look at, how everything went, because I never, like, even my friends, they were really good, they were awesome. Like, I can honestly say, like, growing up where I did, like, and being able to play sports and, have fun with all my friends in the neighborhood, like, it was awesome, but we never talked about anything. No. Like, and that, and again, it's from a time where you didn't necessarily talk about things. It was suppress, internalize, deal with it, moving on. But at a point in time, I realized that because how I internalized certain things, it costed me, certain things, because I wasn't able to verbalize what I was feeling and how I was feeling, and what I could do to correct that. So, with that being said, you pay a small price, and in this case, as it went on, my teen years, again, I had some anger stuff, going on, and you know, it was it just like, it's kind of like when a woman says I'm fine, you know, or a guy says I'm all right, or I'm good, you know, like that's sort of the answer, because I didn't know how to, verbalize what was going on. And I don't think I really understood what was going on at that time. Um, just because it didn't hold any weight. It wasn't, it wasn't spoken about. It wasn't upfront, so it was never on the forefront of my mind. It was something that was always, kept in the back, and ultimately in the subconscious, that I wasn't, paying attention to, and just suppressing everything that came down. So on the front, on the outside, everything was good. Everything was great, grand, wonderful. And, but, now it's like, nobody says, hey, how you doing? You know, you look kind of off today. Is there something that I can, help you with? You know, um, it wasn't like that. We didn't have that back then. So, this is stuff that I'm learning, about, and applying to my day to day. But the irony of this whole thing is, I've always said kids are sponges, and I was one of them. Where, you know you do become a product of your environment, um, early on, simply because you don't know any better. And it's not a fault of you. And that's one thing you kind of have to understand, is that, how you grew up, unless you made those choices clearly and concisely, then you can only blame yourself. But as far as how, what your parents, whether you had one parent, two parents, no parents, I mean, it's kind of how, you grew up, and you absorbed your environment. Now, if you grew up in a, like, I grew up in a suburban environment, it was very laid back, it was very chill. It was, it was good, in, in, in the sense of it, that, there's really no sort of outside drama. And but then you have those that grew up in inner city, where chaos was second nature to them. They were dealing with stuff 10 times worse, than I ever would. Um, at my age, and so even though I would get, my parents did provide. They provided me financial backing. Um, but when it came to emotions, no. Um, and that was something that I look back on now. It's like, wow. Um, and it's just kind of, excuse me, learning about, how bad that I've really suppressed um, a lot of things as far as what everybody said, instead of speaking up and saying, hey, listen, you know, this is bothering me, or I don't like this, we have to go another route, and we kind of have to, move forward with that. That wasn't there. So I think in the long run, teaching our kids early on, I tell my daughter this, it's, always speak your mind, use your voice. And I'm very clear with my daughter, and I make sure that she knows that she can come to me regardless. If she's telling factual things and she's telling me the truth, I am never going to get mad at her for that. And that's one thing that I kind of, you know, bring bring her and reiterate to her constantly because I want her to use her voice, you know. Um, so I mean, realistically, like if I could go back and tell my younger self anything, it would be this. It's that you don't have to earn love by being quiet. You don't have to manage everyone else's feelings to stay safe. You're allowed to feel, even if no one else around you is ready to. So thinking about that, kind of going back at it line by line, is speak up, and you will earn that love. Again, the only person you have to manage is yourself. You don't have to manage mom, dad, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, cousins, best friends. That's one thing that you really have to pay attention to is you have to pay attention to yourself. You have to manage yourself. Um, and it's okay to feel the way that you feel, whether it be happy, sad, angry. Um, one of the things is you just have to find an outlet and a channel or to be able to speak upon or platform, if you will. Because you are going to come across some tough SOBs, some parents that, they had kids to have kids, and that's it. They didn't, I don't think there was maybe any sort of plan or, as I've said, is becoming a parent is you can talk to 1,000 people, you can read 1,000 books, but until you become a parent, you don't have the foggiest as far as what it's going to take to raise that child. And the thing is you're doing it the best way that you can, and nobody's going to fault you for that. Nobody. If they do, then screw them because they're just being judgy because it's not done their way. You know what I mean? So, um, but as I was growing up, I was already carrying silent expectations, where I had to be strong and I had to be calm to be okay because again, I only saw emotions in conflict. Um, and I would um, as I would get older, again, it's the fact that we got into certain things where I let anger take over, and that's for um, that became pretty interesting to say the least. Um, but that's for another episode. As far as this episode goes, it's for the boy and for anyone else who became something they're still trying to unlearn. And that is really one of the biggest things is, when you do something repetitively, subconsciously, over and over and over and over again, um, and it just becomes second nature. Now, if it's a positive thing, guess what? You're already ahead of the game. But if you're taking in that negative energy, those negative words, those negative actions, they do become a part of you. And you have to learn to let go and unlearn those habits. And, whether you're younger or older, it can be done. It's something that you have to understand. And, um, it's you have to make the choice yourself. If you want to unlearn something, you will unlearn something, guaranteed. It's just going to take you, could take you 4, 6, 8, 12 weeks or a year. You know, don't necessarily worry about the timeline. Just, really focus on yourself because it can be done. You just have to believe in yourself. So, in closing, I just wanted to ask you, did you grow up playing a role just to feel accepted? Ask yourself that. Did you become a chameleon, in your friend group, whatever it is, just so people would say, hey, you know what, they're here. Now we can have some fun. But if you like this episode, drop a comment. Tell me what yours was. Whether you were the fixer, the achiever, the peacemaker, or the invisible one. Just remember, we're all unlearning here. This new episode will be dropping this Sunday at 7 a.m. Subscribe if you're walking this path too. Have a good night.